boys and girls, it's Mrs. J. Thanks for joining me today. I have some math for you today. If you'll take a look on the table, and again, I apologize. I know you probably have to rearrange and change the orientation of your computer a little bit, and I apologize for that. You're going to need worksheets 4.6 for the reteach and practice. Now, the links to these are in your framework that I sent to you on Monday, and I also have sent you attachments to these worksheets in the email that I sent you with the link to this video. Now, you may or may not be able to print them out, and that's okay. If you have just some scrap paper or some plain white paper, you can follow along with us. I actually did not do 2 videos for this lesson because we actually started rulers in school before we had to leave. So this is actually a review lesson. So we'll do a little bit of reviewing about measuring and rulers when we start. And then what I'll do is I'll go over the worksheets, and if you've done them ahead of time, that would be great. You can check your answers, or if you have them, you can do them with me, or if you just have scrap paper, you can make the lines on scrap paper for practice. Okay, so 4.6, reteach and practice are the 2 worksheets that you'll need for today from the framework or the email that I sent you. Okay, so the other thing that you're going to need is in your house somewhere, you're going to have to find a ruler. Now, I really had to dig hard for this. Now, the funny thing is we have a lot of rulers in our house, but they get used all the time for measuring and straight edges and whatever. So I finally found this one in the art cart in the basement, but usually we've got them in the kitchen. They're on the desk. They're in the junk drawer in the kitchen. You know, there's one on the work table in the dining room for Connor and Kenzie, or they're upstairs. Who knows? But I did find one, and so my ruler looks like this. Now, your ruler may look a little bit different. It may be plastic. It may be cleared. It may be a color, and that's okay. However, all rulers have the same things in common that we're going to talk about. The first thing I want to remind you of is the fact that, and I'm going to hold this up a little higher so you can see it. Whoa. I want you to remember we talked about the empty space at the beginning of a ruler. Remember, we talked about how sometimes when they make rulers in the factory, they may not be able to cut every ruler exactly the same, but what they can do is they can print and mark the lines on the ruler exactly the same. So your ruler may have a little space at the beginning before the markings start where your 0 is, and I'll kind of show you mine down here at the other end. If it's focused, you can see I have a little space at the end of my 12 at the end of the ruler. Okay, so my ruler, the actual wooden part, is a touch longer than 12 inches, but the space that gets measured from the 0 line up to 12 is 12 inches. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about measuring with a ruler. And if you remember, when we did our fraction lesson, first of all, we learned how to write fractions on a number line. And fractions on a number line are important because that's how a ruler is set up. Okay, so let's pretend I had 0 here and I'm going to count to 1 inch. Now I have fourths, so you know my 1 equals my fraction of 4/4. Now if I were to start, I would have 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4. And when I added up my next 1/4 inch, I would get 4/4, and that would be a whole. Now, you know, every time I added another 4/4, I would get to the next number. And we learned about this with fractions greater than 1. So if I kept counting, I would have 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, and 8/4. When I got to 8/4, 8 divided by 4 is 2, so I would be at the 2-inch marker. Okay. The other thing I want you to remember is that we talked about this 2 2/4 has an equivalent fraction. And it has a fraction that means it's equal to, it takes up the same amount of space. And there's a fraction that's way more popular than 2/4 that we use to describe things. And so we say our fraction in the middle is 1/2. Okay, because 2/4 equals half of the distance between each inch. So this is why it looks really weird when you have a 1/4, a 1/2, and a 3/4 on your ruler to measure. Sometimes kids find that really confusing as to why there's a fraction with a 2 in the middle of the fractions that have 4s as the denominator. And that's why, because you have to remember that the 1/2 is actually the 2/4, but we call it 1/2. All right, that's what big kids and adults do when we talk about something. We talk about it being a half. So on our rulers and when we do our measurement worksheets, we're going to use these fractions to help us on the ruler if we have marks that are in between an inch. So if it's in between like 0 to 1, or in between 1 and 2, or 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, if our line is anywhere in between, we're going to find which fraction it's closest to, and that's going to help us to find the right 1/4 inch. Now in 3rd grade, you have to find the measurement of lines to the nearest 1/4 inch. So that means it can be anywhere of these fractions on the number line. So it may end in a solid inch, okay? Because remember, that would be 4/4. That would be measuring to a 1/4. It could go to 3/4. It could go to a 1/2. It could go to 1/4. So all the fractions will be a little different. Now I do want to show you on my ruler, because this ruler is a little different than the school rulers that we used. Our school rulers were special because they were made just for 3rd graders, and in between each of the inches they only had the lines for the 1/2 inch, and then they had the lines for the 1/4 and the 3/4 marks. So all of these other lines up here that make rulers kind of busy, on our school rulers they weren't there. So it made it a little bit easier for us to pick out exactly the line that we needed to. In case you're curious, so these are ruler markings to the 1/4. And you can see they make those the biggest and the longest lines because those are the ones that people use most often. So they make them longer so that it's a little bit more convenient and easier for you to see. The next longest lines are 1/8 because our 4ths, if you can imagine counting on a number line, there's 4ths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That counts out to 1/8. And those teeny tiny little lines at the top, that breaks an inch up into 1/16. So the teeny tiny little space between those little teeny tiny lines is 1/16 of an inch. Okay, now you probably won't need that maybe till 4th or 5th grade, but in 3rd grade we're only going to do to the 1/4 inch. So on your ruler, I need to make sure that you can find and become familiar with the longest lines in between. The 1/2 inch will be the easiest to find, and then the one to the left is the 1/4 mark, and the one to the right is the 3/4 mark. Okay, so now that we've done a little practice and review for our ruler lesson, let's take a look at the worksheet. So if you have the Reteach worksheet, that would be great. And if you don't have it, maybe you've already looked at it. If not, you can just follow along with me. You're actually not going to need your ruler here because they've given you the ruler and they have marked out a line to the nearest spot on the ruler. Now my printer didn't print in color, so my rulers look gray. I think on the worksheet they might actually look wooden color. But this says we're going to measure to the nearest 1/2 inch. Now even though it says 1/2 inch, if it's in between we're going to mark it to the 1/2 inch. But it may also go out to the nearest inch if that's where it's closest to. So if I take a look at my line, I'm going to come down here to my ruler and I hope you can read that. That line is closest to 2 inches. And there's a couple different ways you can mark inches on your paper. This is how you would abbreviate the word inches. You may also see 2 inches. You may see a little mark that looks like that. It looks like a quotation mark. That also stands for inches. Okay. So if I look at number 2, my line comes out to here. So maybe I'll draw it down so you can see it a little bit better. So I've gone past the 1 inch mark. I've gone past the 2 inch mark. I've gone past the 3 inch mark, but I'm not quite to the 4 yet, and I'm right exactly in the middle. So I know that that's a half. Now when you write 3.5, remember you want to write the whole number big, and then you want to write the fraction to take up the same amount of space as the whole number, and then you must have a label. Measuring is one of those things in math that you always have to have a label. All right, so there's our first 2 examples. Now if we take a look at 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to be marking to the 1/4 inch. And on your paper somewhere, I always like to tell kids, you might want to do 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. Just as a little reminder so that you can keep straight in your head which order that the fractions go in, so you remember that 1/4 is always in the middle. So if I look at my ruler here, I've gone past 1 inch, I've gone past 2 inches, I've gone past 3 inches, but I'm not to the 4. So I know my whole number is going to be a 3. So I have 3 inches and I have a little bit more. Now I'll help you with this because I don't know how well you can see it. I'm even having a little time to see it, the black lines on the gray ruler. But this comes down right here to my first marker. And then I see another one in the middle, and then another one, and then 4 inches. So if I'm looking at the line that's the first marker after 3 inches, that means I have 1/4. So we would say that that line is 3 1/4 inches long. Okay, let's take a look at number 4. So you can see my line starts at 0. It doesn't start at the edge of the ruler. It starts at the 0 mark. And it's almost to the 1, but not quite. Sometimes when you're measuring, you know what? Not everything in life is perfect. So it may not be exactly right, but you have to take the best guess that you can and measure to the closest distance. That's why it says to the nearest inch up in the directions. So this just clearly goes to 1 inch. So I'm going to label 1 inch. And then if I go to number 5, I've gone past 1 inch, 2 inches, but I'm not to the 3 yet. So my whole inch is a 2. And then I'm going to count, there's 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. Now this is a tricky one. I don't like when they do this, but it's bigger than a half, but it's not quite 3/4. My suggestion is always go to the bigger measurement. Okay, so that would be 2 3/4 inches. And so then we would be done with that first worksheet. So if you have your second worksheet, this one's a little different. So at the top, there's 3 different sections and there's 3 different lines. So in the first problem, we're going to measure to the nearest inch. And the second one, we're going to measure to the nearest 1/2 inch. And in the last one, to the nearest 1/4 inch. Now, there's 2 directions here. And this little thing here is just giving you kind of a little reminder about how long an inch is, if you didn't have a ruler. So this says, estimate the length of the line segment in inches, and then measure. So this problem is going to be worth 2 points. It's one of those 2-pointer problems, but actually it's going to be worth more than that because remember, a label is always worth a point too. So they want us to estimate the length of the line segment. So if I look from here to here, I don't know, how long do I think that is? 3 inches is probably a little too short. 5 is too long. I don't know. I'm going to go with 4 inches. And I'm actually going to do all my guessing first, then I'm going to do my measuring. I don't know why. That just seems like more fun. I like to make my guesses first. Okay, so for then number 2, we have to measure from here to here. Well, if I said this one's 4, this one's a little shorter, and I have to do a 1/2 inch. I don't know, maybe 3.5. I think 2.5 is too short. I'm gonna go for 3.5. Now I have to measure to the 1/4 inch. Ooh, okay, well, my lines are getting shorter and shorter, so my guesses had better keep getting smaller. So let's think, how long do you think they are? Maybe 3.25 inches? I don't know, that's probably a little too short, too big. I don't know, it's just a guess. 3.25 inches. Woof, and this one's bigger. So I'm gonna go 5.25 inches. I don't know. 5, remember this is just guesses. These are just guesses, okay? So that's what I thought when the directions said estimate, what I thought maybe they were. So now let's do our measuring. So remember, the first thing that you want to do whenever you have a ruler is you don't want to put it right to the edge of the ruler. You want to line where you're beginning to measure up from the beginning of your line segment right there. Oh, no, look, I have 4 inches. Woo, I'm a good guesser today. 4 inches. And remember, you have to have labels there, so you would get a point for the right score and a point for the label. If we were in class, remember, that's how we do that. So estimate the length in 1/2 inches. So I'm going to put my line at the beginning of my start line. Ha! Look at that! 3.5 inches. Exactly, because there's my 3 and there's my 4, and I'm at the line exactly in the middle. Because remember, if we're thinking about, I'd have 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4. If I'm thinking about the lines in between inches, this is what my fractions would end up being. So I'm going to go with 3.5 inches. Ooh, I got that one right too. I must be making some lucky guesses here. So I'm going to move my paper up a little bit so you can see. So now 3.25. I don't know. I think my guess is a little long because if this is 3.5, I don't think that's a 1/4. So I don't think I had a good guess on this one. Nope, I'm a little short. So if you look, I'm less than 3 inches. And if I count my lines, my big lines, there's my 1/2. And I'm 1 hop over from the 1/2. So 1 hop over from the 1/2 is 3/4. So I am 2.75 inches. 3/4 inches. Yay! Okay. 5.25. Oh, I don't know if I got this one right either. I think I was a little ambitious in my guessing. Nope. Did not get that right. So, I have a line that's exactly in between 4 inches and 5 inches. And when I'm going exactly in the middle between 2 inches, I end up with a 1/2. So 4, I'm sorry, my bracelets keep clunking on the table. That's probably very distracting. 4.1/2 inches. Okay, 4.1/2 inches. So now the bottom part is going to be a little bit different. So now what we're going to do, instead of measuring line segments, we're going to draw line segments instead. Now a line, there's a difference between a line and a line segment. When we draw fractions on a number line, you might see that the lines go and they have arrows on the end. That means that the line just keeps going and going and going. When you have a line segment, that means you have a definite beginning and a definite end. And if we're measuring something to a specific measurement that's given to us, a given length, we want a specific beginning and a specific ending. So that's why we have a line segment. So let's see how we do here. Oops, trying to fix my chair. Okay, so 3.75 inches. Now these are kind of squished down here, but we're just going to be drawing a couple lines, so they should fit. So 3 3/4 inches. So you always want to make a beginning dot right at your 0 mark. Okay. Then we want to go to 3 inches plus 3/4. So I'm going to go to my 3 inches, and then remember my lines. I have 1/4, 1/2, and then 3/4. I like to write that over and over and over again to help remind myself. So I have 3 inches, and then I have, there's my 1/4, my 1/2, and my 3/4 is right there. So I have 3 inches and 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. And I'm going to use my straight edge. Whoop, I went a little farther. If that happens to you, if you have pencil, you can erase it. Mine's a little bigger, so I'm just going to make my dot like that. Okay, my marker got a little too excited and just kept going. Okay, so it would be from the dot to the dot. Okay, 1.5 inches. So I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to go to 1, and then I'm going to look for the marker right in between the 1 and the 2, the halfway mark. I'm going to mark a dot there, and I'm going to see if I can go very slowly this time so I don't go over. There we go. That's better. Okay, so 1.5 inches. Now I'm going to do 4 1/4. Okay, 4 1/4 inches. So I'm going to start at the 0. Okay, and I'm going to go all the way over to the 4. And then remember, my 1/4 line would be the first big line in between, because I would have 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. So I'm going to go right here to a 4th. And draw my line. Okay, 4 1/4. Okay, and then 2 inches. That's a nice easy one. So I'm going to start at my 0. I'm going to mark 2 inches, okay, with my 2 dots. And then I'm going to use my marker and my straight edge to draw my line. Okay, so boys and girls, I hope you had fun with rulers. Rulers are actually a lot of fun. So if you have time, you can work on these worksheets. You can either have done them with me, or if you want to watch this and then you want to stop and start the video and practice your own, that would be okay. If you want to do some extra practicing, I know that our paper was kind of short. If you've got some longer paper, you might be able to go up into some of the measurements that are a little higher on the ruler. But you definitely need a bigger piece of paper than the amount of space that I had. So you'd have to practice on something a little bit bigger if you want to go to measurements that are a little larger. So you can either practice drawing and measuring some lines on paper. If you want to go around your house and measure some things, let's see, I just picked up, I don't even know where this came from. So I just found a Ziploc baggie. Let's see. So let's just, for fun, I'm going to measure the Ziploc baggie. So I'm going to start at 0. It goes to the half. So it goes 6 inches, 1/4 and a half. It is 6 1/2 inches wide. Well, that's kind of fun. Let me see, what else can I find on my floor? Oh, look what Kenzie has. She used to play with little critters when she was little. There happens to be a little critter house on the floor next to me. So this is something fun you can do. Just go around your house and find some things to measure. Okay, so if I was going to measure, let's see, this looks like Chipmunk, Mama Chipmunk. So I would kind of start at the ear, and I would go down to the bottom. It looks like she is 3, and my closest guess would be, let's start right at the 0. The bottom of her dress is closest to the 1/4 mark. So I would say little Mrs. Chipmunk is 3 1/4 inches. Okay, let's look at little baby boy Chipmunk here. He might be toddler Chipmunk or kid Chipmunk. I don't know. There's probably babies around here somewhere. We've got a zillion of these things. All right, so this is a little shorter. He's tinier. So we would go to 2 inches, but not quite 3. So it's got to be 2 plus something extra. And I see there's my 1/4, my 1/2, 3/4. So I would say my little chipmunk guy is 2 3/4 inches. All right, so those are just some things that I happened to find down here while I was sitting in the chair. So you can practice measuring and drawing some lines on paper. You can find little critters and little toys around your house, objects maybe that you want to pick up and measure, and see if you can do those to the 1/4 inch. Remember, use 1/4, 1/2, or 3/4. Have fun and thanks for watching. Bye.